This show is part of the Head Stuff Podcast Network.
Welcome, gather round the fireside and listen to a tale of Fionn McCool, Cuchulainn, Deirdre of the Sorrows, Grainne Wail. From giants right down to fairies, of both the drooping and solitary, and ghosts who are sometimes scary. Anything goes by the fireside. Yeah. Fireside, the Buka Fireside, the Marrow Fireside. Kings and queens fighting heroes, don't you run from the fun, there's no need to hide. Sit by the fireside. Fireside.
Hello and welcome to Fireside, the Irish storytelling podcast. Each episode of Fireside, we take a story from folklore or mythology, retell it, have a chat about the tale itself and about the craft, culture and history of storytelling. My name is Kevin C. O'Lahan and I'm your host and your Fireside Bard. Welcome to episode 122 of Fireside. Today on the Irish Storytelling Podcast, we are telling the story about the fourth landing of the island of Ireland, and we are back in very familiar territory. This is the story of the arrival of the Fir Bolg. But before we get down to that, I want to give a very big welcome to any new and returning listeners. If you're a new listener and you listen to this episode, why don't you go right back to the very beginning, 121 episodes ago, and see what we've been building up to over the journey of Fireside so far. And if you're a returning listener, as always, thank you so much for your continued support. Please follow me over on Instagram at Fireside Bard if you want to check out some of my poetry, some of my other work. It's the best place to get in contact with me. If you really want to support the podcast and join the community of Fireside and the Fireside supporters, please do so over on headstuffpodcast.com, where you can join Headstuff Plus, where for a fee of €5 a month, although you can pay whatever you want, you can gain access to not only bonus episodes and content for Fireside, but also for all of the podcasts on the Headstuff Podcast Network, and there are many great ones that you should also support. And you get to support an independent podcast and an independent podcast network. It's all very homegrown. It's all very earthy and mossy. So join Headstuff Plus and come along. Anybody who follows me over on Instagram, who anyone is looking for any more incentive to join me for Poetry Day Ireland tomorrow, which will be tomorrow as of the day this will come out. On the 29th of April, it's Poetry Day Ireland, where I'm doing an Instagram live on myth in Irish poetry. I'm going to be having a read of some of the great poets and the poetry and the mythology surrounding that poetry, and I'm even going to be reading some of my own and playing some tunes and some songs. Just going to be a nice thing to do. That's going to be from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. Irish time on Poetry Day Ireland, 29th of April. I'd love to see some of you there. The best thing about the poetry are the Instagram lives, which I have not done one of so far, is of course that you check in when you start viewing it. You can message in, so it's a really nice chance for us to sit at the fireside together. But if you're not on Instagram or you don't get to the Instagram live, I'm going to leave the video for a while, and then I'm going to use the audio of it as a bonus episode for the supporters of Headstuff Plus. So the supporters will get a chance to listen to it there. And speaking of supporters, I want to give a big thank you to the two latest for this week. That is Martina Rafferty and Rebecca Garvey. Thank you so much for joining up Headstuff Plus. They're joining Matthew Hill, Elizabeth Frizz, Dara Courtney, Kevin Magner and Shane Grogan as the most recent from this batch of the last couple of weeks. Thank you so much. Headstuff Plus is a brand new thing, so we appreciate your support immensely. And I also want to give a thank you to a newest patron, who is Deanna Garrison. Is it Dina or Deanna? I'd say Dina Garrison. Thank you so much for joining over on Patreon. The Patreon account is still there. So thank you, Dina, and joining Kelly MacDonald and Gretchen Ingram as the latest patrons for the last month. And with that, it's time to get down to a little story. I can't believe we're here already. How these past few months have gone on the podcast has been quite exciting and quite new, and I've kind of been flying on the seat of my pants a little bit, in that I didn't have this plan to explore these six landings of Ireland, because, as I've said a couple of times before in the last few episodes, I didn't think there was 6 stories to be gained. Irish mythology starts with the Tuatha De Danann for all intents and purposes, and these 5 previous landings were all from this Book of Invasions, which was this quite controversial Christian text that's main point was to link Christian doctrine to pagan myth, and to tell those early pagan Irish that their gods were not gods, but they were heroes, and that their gods were still connected to Christianity, and it was a conversion tool, an indoctrinating tool. So I didn't think there'd be as much narrative juice there, but how wrong I was, and what great characters and great stories it's yielded. But it's crazy being here at the Fir Bolg, because this is where we began. You know, when we began with episode 2, our first episode of mythology, where we talked about the landing of the Tuatha De Danann, we spoke about the Fir Bolg from the point of view of the Tuatha De Danann arriving to this birthright land, and the Fir Bolg were at best this inconvenience to negotiate with, and at worst this enemy for the Tuatha De Danann to liberate the island from. And now we hear the other side of the story, and we will chat more as always, of course, but this is the arrival of the Fir Bolg on Fireside. The arrival of the Fir Bolg. Fintan mac Bóchra had been in the form of various wild animals for hundreds of years. He had been in the form of a hawk and salmon and everything in between. He always returned to human form, but over the years Fintan began to take on more and more traits of the animals. Each year his human form would become hairier, more feral, more animalistic. One day, Ireland's first druid saw his own reflection in a pool of water, and was horrified by what he saw. He saw a ragged old man, one far removed from the humanity he had known when he first arrived in Éire with his beloved wife, Cessar. The years had been hard and rough. He had watched the great flood drown all of his own people. He had watched the Partholonians come and settle and be ravaged and killed by plague. He had then watched the Nemedians come, and the same thing happen through war with the sea pirates, the Fomorians. When a final force of Nemedians had fought and lost against the Fomorian stronghold of Tory Island, the 30 Nemedian survivors all fled from Ireland. The Fomorians were left on Tory Island, and Fintan mac Bóchra, once again, was Ireland's only inhabitant. Nemed's grandson Semyon had been one of those 30 surviving Nemedians. He had taken a boat filled with the clay and soil of Éire and fled to mainland Greece. His aim had been to return to Scythia, the ancestral home of his grandfather. But once Semyon arrived in Greece, he was immediately enslaved. During this enslavement, Semyon had a family and began the lineage of an entirely new people. Soon Semyon's descendants numbered thousands, all under the cruel slavery of the Greeks. They were forced to carry large sacks of clay over immensely infertile and barren land. The only land they were given to call their own was dominated by poisonous snakes. But the bags of Irish clay that had been carried by Semyon from Éire gave the people an enchantment which protected them from danger. Being forced to haul heavy bags of clay over inhospitable land and being protected by an enchanted bag of clay gave this people their amusing but apt name, the Fir Bolg, or the Men of Bags. Back in Éire, after being horrified by his own reflection, Fintan mac Bóithre sought something new. A new form. That night he dreamt of strength, pride, and regality, and the next morning Fintan awoke and he had taken the form of a great stag. Again he was young and tall and powerful. He was no longer the ragged, weak creature he had seen in his own reflection. The stag Fintan was able to defend himself from all of Éire's predators, and with his great antlers he felt like he had finally become the king of Éire, the role he had always been destined for, but had ran from the responsibility of. And so it went for 250 years. The Fir Bolg carried clay as slaves of ancient Greece, and Fintan mac Bóithre protected himself and the island of Éire in the form of a stag. But even the most powerful and deeply rooted magic grows old and weak, and after 2.5 centuries, the stag was no longer able to defend himself as he once could. A local pack of wolves began to smell the weaker scent of the aging stag they had always feared. They surrounded Fintan's cave and demanded he give himself up to the pack. The weak but still proud stag came out and asked the wolves for one more day on this earth before they would devour him. The wolves were a vicious but still noble animal, and they allowed the stag this one final night. But on that same night, Fintan mac Bóithre dreamt that he was in the form of a boar. He woke up the next morning, and once again was young and powerful, and the boar emerged from the cave with his great tusks and fought, gored, and defended himself from the pack of wolves, who once again were forced to submit to the animal king of Ireland. It was at the point of this metamorphosis that the Fir Bolg of Greece had grown tired of their enslavement. They had long dreamed of the land of Éire, the soil of which protected them from the poisonous snakes of their own land. One day they would escape. One day they would return, and one day they did just that. The Fir Bolg fashioned boats out of canvas, what we would now call a curragh. And what else can canvas be used to make? That's right, bags. The Fir Bolg settled on Ireland, which they divided into 5 provinces: Ulster, Connacht, Meath, Leinster and Munster. They named the central province of Meath after their ancestor, Meatha, who was the primary druid of Nemed, who had established the centre of the island on the hill of Ishnach. This was the place the island would be ruled from, because the central province of Meath could be a neutral meeting ground for the other 4 provinces of Leinster, Munster, Ulster and Connacht. The Fir Bolg also set up petty kingdoms with a ruler in each of the 5 provinces. But in Meath, on the hill of Tara, it was the Fir Bolg who established the role of one king over all others, the High King of Ireland. The Fir Bolg were a race known for their hardship and their suffering, and so they were not a naturally combative people. The Fomorians had remained isolated on Tory Island and their homeland of Fomor. As such, the Fir Bolg and the Fomorians were able to live in a relative peace and harmony. But 37 years passed, and in that time there were 9 Fir Bolg High Kings of Ireland. The last and best of these was Yuki mac Urk. Yuki introduced a system of justice in Éire, and it was said that while he was king, no rain fell in Ireland, merely enough dew to keep the island green and fertile. Also, under Yuki's rule, there was a harvest festival held every single year. But after 10 years of rule, a stranger came to the gates of Tara. He announced himself as the original inhabitant of Éire. He looked ancient, decrepit, and severely insane. "My name is Fintan MacBocra, and I bring a warning. The warning was that another race had landed on the west coast of the island. They had arrived in enchanted flying ships, and they had emerged from a great mist. No one knew who or what these creatures were. "Is it the Fomorians?" asked Yucky. "No," replied Fintan. "I know the Fomorians when I see them. These people share a descendant with yours. When the Nemedians were all but defeated and the last 30 spread across the world, your ancestor Semyon returned to Greece, but another went north. These Nemedians settled in 4 cities: Phalias, Gorius, Phineas, and Morius. There they learned arts, culture, and magic. This magic makes them dangerous. They call themselves the people of the goddess Danu, or the Tuatha De Danann." Yucky was immediately distressed by this news. He sent out his greatest warrior Sreng to parley with the representative of these Tuatha De Danann, Brez. It was warrior meeting warrior, but not a drop of blood was spilled that day, for Sreng and Brez found that they actually got on really quite well. "Nice sword," said Sreng. "That is some shield," replied Brez. Sreng returned with the demands of Nuda, king of the Tuatha De Danann. Nuda says, because we are descended from the same stock, we each have a right to the bounty of Ireland. He proposes we divide the nation in 2. Yucky was immediately put in a very difficult position, as high kings often are. The Fir Bolg were not built for war, and these magical fairy people and he were distant relatives. But the Fir Bolg had also endured 230 years of hardship and slavery in Greece. Here in Eire they had lived free and prosperous for 37 years. Yucky MacErc would not give that up without a fight. He said, "If we take this lying down and give up half of the island, what's to stop these other exiles returning and laying claim? We must defend our honour now to stave off future bloodshed." And so, war was declared. The 2 groups met at the pass of Belgatten, and so began the first great battle of Moytara. For 4 days the 2 armies hacked and slashed and fought each other. They were well matched, but soon the edge of the Tuatha De Danann came into focus in the form of the Morrigan. The triple goddess of battle spread confusion through the ranks of the Fir Bolg. They had not known rain in the 10 years of Yucky MacErc's reign, but the Morrigan made it rain blood. This added dread and fear into the minds of the resilient Fir Bolg. A light came when Sreng, greatest warrior and commander of the armies of the Fir Bolg, met with the king of the Tuatha De Danann, Nuda, in single combat. With one swing of his sword, Sreng cut off Nuda's arm, incapacitating the king of their enemy. But for 4 days the Morrigan had dried up all of the water supplies of the Fir Bolg, and King Yucky MacErc grew more and more thirsty. He and his armed guard left the battlefield in search of water for his army. But once lured away, the Morrigan found the king of the Fir Bolg and cut him down where he stood. The Morrigan was vicious, wicked, and unmerciful, but she was still respectful and noble. And the Morrigan buried Yucky MacErc and erected a grave and wrote his name in Ogham. With the death of their king, the Fir Bolg were defeated. But because of the valiance with which they had fought, the survivors were spared. And because of their familial allegiance, they were rewarded. Sreng became the new king of what remained of the Fir Bolg, and the Tuatha De Danann gave them the consolation prize of their choice of province to rule. The Fir Bolg chose Connacht to the west. However, virtually no mention of the men of Bags appears past the first battle of Moytura. Some believe it is because the survivors fled, but far more likely, the Fir Bolg quickly mingled and assimilated with the Tuatha De Danann. After all, they were each of them descendants of Nemeth. And one significant figure, Ferdia, hero of the Táin and the blood brother turned rival of Cú Chulainn, was said to be a descendant of the Fir Bolg. During the previous battle, Fintan mac Bócra had finally got off the fence and got involved. He fought on the side of the Fir Bolg, but following their defeat, returned to the wilderness to observe the fifth inhabitants of Éire. These fifth inhabitants would bring more to this tiny, windy island than any before. They would become gods we still know today, and they would give the island its name, named for the sovereignty goddess, Eru. The arrival of the Tuatha De Danann marks the centre of the cycle of Irish mythology. All roads lead to their landing, but their landing is only the beginning. To be continued. And that is the story of the arrival of the Fir Bolg on Fireside. I love this story. We have come back around. This is where you get the full feeling of why these are cycles of Irish mythologies. You know, because they just constantly loop back around to each other. And we have finally really looped back around with this far more than I thought we would when we finished the Ulster cycle and the King cycle all the way last year. But there's something so narratively satisfying about coming back to this beginning point with all that we have learned. Anyone who's been listening to this podcast for the beginning, I hope that you can get that sense. I know people listen to it in different ways. There's people who listen to it every week. There's people who have binged it all at once, you know, and sometimes I need to remind myself of these stories as we're going through when there's so many of them now, and I'm the one adapting and researching and writing them. But there's a couple of great things about this. First of all, most importantly, like, we're getting the POV of the Fir Bolg. We're getting this humanizing of the Fir Bolg that we never really have had before, because, like I said at the end there, we never really hear from them again. They don't really feature in any other stories. They're kind of wiped out, all except for the only mention of a descendant of the Fir Bolg that I have come across so far, certainly, the only one of note, is Ferdia in the Táin. And I really like that he is this represented, because he is this great warrior of Connacht, and they chose the province of Connacht. It's hard to know why the Fir Bolg did choose the province of Connacht. So they were given the choice. The Tuatha De Danann didn't want to fight. They just thought, we're both descended from Nemeth, so let's just divide the island in half and live in harmony with each other, which was a good deal. But I also understand Yuki's point of view, that if he had done that, like, of those 30 remaining Nemedians who had fled to the four corners of the world, any amount of them could have come back, but they also could have eventually lived in harmony together. But I understand Yuki's reasons for going to war. But then once they're defeated, rather than kicking them out of Ireland or enslaving the rest of them or murdering the rest of them, the Tuatha De Danann give the Fir Bolg their choice of one of the 5 provinces. So instead of, they don't get half anymore, but they still get a full province. But we are told they do get their choice. They aren't given one. It's just interesting that they didn't. I guess they couldn't have chosen Meath, because Meath would probably be the one you'd think they would choose, because that's where they were ruling from. You know, they had established this centre. I suppose I wonder about Connacht, because that is where the Tuatha De Danann landed, and not where the Fir Bolg landed. So it's interesting that they chose the place where their enemy first came from and first arrived on the island of Ireland. But I think that more than anything, they choose Connacht so that it can connect with Queen Maeve and King Alil and Ferdia. It roots that very much so. But it's interesting that we do never hear from the Fir Bolg again. And while I'm on that point, I wanted to talk about the Fomorians a little bit, who don't feature in this story as much as they have in the last couple. But they are there, they are mentioned, and we do know that the Tuatha De Danann will then go on to fight this great war against the Fomorians, and that will be the second battle of Moytura, which is the great battle of Moytura. That is the big one. And I read a thing a few months ago that I've spoken a little bit about, which is that it is thought that the Fomorians were a representative for otherworldly and natural disasters and plagues, so that like famine and pestilence, flood, that all of these that the Fomorians were the manifestation and the personification of all of these dread and anxieties and these real world things that could happen to people. But they are very much characters. They are very much a people that are described in such dramatically different ways, as sea monsters, as giants, as having one arm, one leg, one eye, and yet they're also totally human because they share family with the Tuatha De Danann. And the thing is, they're not considered one of the 6 landings. This 6 landings thing seems to have come originally from sort of an arbitrary place to coordinate with the 6 ages of the world. And I suppose the 7 days, and like on the 7th day the god rested, so like the 6 days of building the world. So the Tuatha De Danann, they're the 5th. So our 6 landings, now that we've kind of had them all over the course of the podcast, we've got Cesar, coming from ancient Greece, granddaughter of Noah. We have Partholon from ancient Greece. We have Nemed. We have the Fir Bolg. We have the Tuatha De Danann. And then finally we have the Gaels. And that's us. That's the current people living on Ireland. It's kind of been the same since the Gaels. So those are the 6 landings. And the Fomorians are not one of those, even though they are described as living on the island many times. So it is interesting that they never quite get their landing, you know, and they never really stuck here despite sharing this family with so many of these different races, which gives a good argument for their ethereal and environmental nature. But it is very interesting. Another thing I've spoken about before that I actually finally got to the bottom of, it's something I should have found out a long time ago, but I finally thought to look it up and find out. The province of Meath. So Ireland was 5 provinces. It is now 4. Meath is now no longer a province and hasn't been for a long, long time. It is because it's 2 counties now. It's Meath and Westmeath, which are very, very different counties now. So I always wondered at what point, because in mythology Meath is always referred to as a province. It is the central province, the neutral territory, and it is where the Hill of Tara is. It is where the High King of Ireland rules from throughout all the cycles of Irish mythology. And suddenly I never knew whatever happened to it, and I finally found out that it was like a huge amount of consequence that happened in Ireland and to Ireland. It was kind of because of Henry VIII. So I'd like to read you a little bit thing. Henry had broken away from the Holy See and declared himself the head of the church in England, and subsequently refused to recognise the Roman Catholic Church's vestigial sovereignty over Ireland. For this reason, and also to address England's waning power in Ireland, Henry proclaimed the Kingdom of Ireland in 1542, with himself as its monarch. The following year, the counties of Meath and Westmeath Act was passed by the Parliament of Ireland, and Meath was officially divided in 2. The Act was intended to allow a more effective administration in both counties, particularly in Westmeath, which England had lost control of. A new shire town at Mullingar was established along with 4 new baronries, while Trim retained its status as the shire town of Meath. So yeah, in the Act, the Counties of Meath and Westmeath Act was passed to give the British more control over Ireland. They felt like if they divided this province in two, but such a symbolic gesture to literally tear apart the very place where that was so important to those ancient Irish of where their high kingship. It was such an undermining of the beliefs of the country for the previous 1,000 years at least. And I just find that very interesting because also, like Henry VIII was the first English king of Ireland. He was the first one. The British had control over Ireland since the Norman times, since like Henry II. But Henry VIII was actually the first one who called himself the King of England and Ireland. And that was the way it was until Ireland was liberated and we won our independence. So Henry was actually also the first one to introduce the harp as a symbol of Ireland, which is, I always think, an immensely interesting thing because that has become like the symbol of Ireland. Fintan Mac Bóithre is another one I want to talk about. It's been great getting to know him more and more, and he gives this story a nice through line. We have a rare thing in this episode of Fireside in that we have a main plot and a subplot. Usually there isn't the time or the narrative need to have a subplot, but Fintan gives us a real through line because we don't really meet any proper characters in the Fir Bolg, certainly until they arrive in Ireland and when we get Yucky McErk and Sreng. But Fintan Mac Bóithre gives us a nice through line there, and I really liked this element of finding out what he's been doing in Ireland over these years, because Fintan is going to kind of only grow more and more, which is really exciting. It again is just like having discovered this new character that has always been there that we've unexplored. So I have a couple of stories that are going to be coming up in the next couple of weeks that are entirely centered around Fintan. And, you know, he's in the Táin, he's in the Fenian cycle, he's in the historical cycle. So it's going to be very interesting, and it's a very exciting new key in that we can make our way back through the unexplored aspects of the 4 cycles of Irish mythology with this new POV, with this new character of Fintan Mac Bóithre, and I look forward to having more and more crack with him and having more and more crack with all of you. So I will wrap things up there. That was a lot of fun, that episode. Great crack. I hope you all enjoyed it too, and you could hear the enjoyment in my voice. Please do follow me over on Instagram at FiresideBard. Email me at thefiresidebard@gmail.com if you're not on Instagram. Join me Poetry Day Ireland 29th of April over on Instagram for an exploration of myth in Irish poetry, both established poetry and my very own, as well as some music and a few tunes. Looking forward to it. Never done Instagram Live before, but I'm looking forward to marking Poetry Day Ireland very much so. Thanks so much to Alan, Paddy and Connor and everyone over at Headstuff. Next week we will have a story. For episode 1, 2, 3, we have the story of the Field of Garters, a great new folk tale. Another tale of the leprechaun, would you believe? I cannot believe it. Doing another story about the leprechaun. But I really like this one. This one is, it might even be better than the 3 Laughs of the Leprechaun. This might be my favourite leprechaun story I've found. But we'll see what y'all think. I'll see you all. You'll hear me all next time. And remember, wherever you are, and wherever you go, you can always join me by the fireside and also join Headstuff Plus. I forgot to say that there. Remember, wherever you are and wherever you go, you can always join me by the fireside.
This show is part of the Headstuff Podcast Network, a hub for the creative and the curious. Shows are produced in association with Headstuff and the Podcast Studios Dublin. Find out more or become a member at headstuffpodcasts.com.